So today we're back to do another round of recent reads. So this is probably going to be another rapid fire video because I have a lot of science fiction fantasy to get through. Almost all of these are review copies. Most of these are new releases. Some of these I loved, some of these I didn't, and we're going to talk about everything in between. If that all sounds good, let's get started. First, starting with science fiction, we have Ocean's Godori by Elaine, and this is a science fiction story that follows an individual who is of Korean descent. They never really feel like they fit in with their cultural roots. We follow them at the beginning of the story as a good friend of theirs has been framed for murder, and so her and her crew go out to try to figure it out, solve the mystery, and the story goes from there. This one I originally thought was more space opera, but I much more described this book to be a sci-fi thriller. It's very action-packed, fast moving, and you were going to fly through the pages. My favorite part about this was the Korean aspects. I really love the infusion of different cultural elements into speculative fiction, and I thought that was done really well. There was just sprinklings of information, and particularly what I liked is that it had a Korean flair, but I really felt the author took the time to really imagine how that might evolve and be woven into a future, so it didn't feel like I was reading a contemporary story in that regard. So I liked that the elements were there, but modernized, or rather futurized, in this version. The story itself was good to a degree, but not as amazing as I hoped it would be. I think a little bit was that I was looking for a bigger scope story. I wanted something, again, more as a space opera, and instead this is a very intimate story following a group of characters. It's very dialogue heavy, and in a way it just felt very young, or rather the characters themselves felt a little bit flat or one-dimensional at times, and I wanted something a little bit more fleshed out than what I got. That being said, I would definitely read more by this author, more in a series if they continue on with this world, and I liked it, just didn't quite love it. I want this to be an all-time favorite, or at least a favorite of the year, and I don't think it's going to make that mark. Next up, we have Time's Agent by Brenda Peynado, and this is a story where in the future we discover that there are pocket universities, small universes that exist, and at first the academics go out to study them and learn from them, and this is really supposed to change humanity. However, it happens that the corporations become in control of these small pocket universes, and of course capitalism wins over, and rather than enhancing humanity for their good, instead it just uses another way to make money. We follow an archaeologist who them and their spouse were previously investigating this, and it really broke them up as a couple, and we're following them in the aftermath that follows. This is one that in terms of premise I found to be really interesting. I've read a few books that play around with pocket universes. It's still a theory or idea that blows my mind and at least bends my mind in very difficult ways, and so I loved a lot of the science that was woven into the setup of this one. In terms of the story, it was a bit relationship heavy or character focused, and it's a case that I enjoyed or appreciated the elements, the ideas expounded upon within here, but I didn't necessarily have a great time reading it. I don't think it really worked incredibly well as a narrative, so it really depends if you're looking for cool science fiction ideas, or if you're someone who needs stronger characters or a really interesting execution of the plot. I don't think that the narrative was anything special, so it's a book I liked but didn't necessarily love as much as I wanted to, but I definitely think that others, depending on what they're looking for in a sci-fi book, will enjoy this one a little bit more. Next up, we have a Backlist review copy, and that is Icehenge by Stanley. This is a Tor Essentials re-release of a book that was previously published. It's a great way for them to bring books back into modern publication. In this one, they discover that on Pluto there is a version of what appears to be like our Earth's Stonehenge, except much larger. And of course there is the mystery of how it got there, and so they go to study. And of course there is more going on, as the stories tend to be. This is one where I was very excited because the author, I've read many of their more iconic, popular Backlist titles. Some of them I've loved, some of them I've loved less, and unfortunately this one fell into the less category. I think that, again, the premise, the idea was very exciting. I wanted to know what the mystery was all about, but I didn't particularly enjoy the narration style. I think the characters tend to be really flat, which is not something I always need in science fiction. I really should clarify that before I get too much hate in the comments, because I definitely think that a lot of times you read sci-fi for the ideas, but in my mind, while it had an intriguing premise on paper, the execution of the overall narrative story, not just the character work itself, really hindered it. I found myself not as interested in the mystery as I should have been, and I really found this book just not a very enjoyable ride. So there's been other cases where I have really enjoyed this author's work. I think they can do some really interesting things, often reminding me of Neil Stephenson, one of my favorite authors. And in this one, I just found it to be a little bit muddled and not giving me even the info dumps that I arguably even wanted. Instead, the story tried too hard to be character focused in a case where the characters were perhaps not the strength of the story, if that makes sense. Then from there, let's talk about The Fortunate Fall by Cameron Reed, another Tor Essentials re-release of a previously published book. In this one, we follow a woman who is a futuristic reporter. She has had camera-like equipment implanted in her brain that lets her capture everything she's seeing and broadcast it out to those that are watching her feed. And so in the story, she comes across and sees a cover-up of something horrible, and of course, then she is in great danger, great trouble because of what she has exposed. This is one that I love the premise of it. I think it's really interesting. While this book is not incredibly old, I don't want to say that it's older than it is, but I think that it's quite interesting that the author was able to predict some of the vlogging that is very recent today and really seeing those trends. And I love when you have authors predicting things that are already happening in different ways, but not too different in reality. And so I really love some of the conversations around having her view and her perspective being something that others are watching, and that prospect there. And then you actually just have a genuinely good thriller plot. So if you're someone who looks for an action-packed story, this one moves along, there's a good mystery, and again, there's intrigue and political maneuvering and things that they're trying to hide and keep away from the public. And so overall, I was pleasantly surprised. This is what I like about Tor Essential titles, is that it lets me read books that otherwise would have flown under my radar. I wasn't otherwise familiar with this author. I'd never heard of this book before, but I got an opportunity to review it, and I'm really glad I did, because I do think a lot of you will enjoy this one too. Again, if you love those more action-packed stories that still has some interesting scientific ideas sprinkled throughout, so it has some depth and meat to it, this one really met all of those qualifications for me. I had a good time reading it, and I think a lot of you will as well. Now let's switch over to fantasy, starting with The Sky on Fire by Jenn. Lyons is the same author who wrote the Chorus of Dragons series that I read a couple of years ago and really enjoyed. So this is the start of a new series, so if you want to start here, you can. It's a piece of fantasy that follows a woman who is a dragon rider. She's just trying to survive, and something happens, and she ends up getting saved by this group, and they ask her to help them with this heist job where they need her and her dragon to assist. And so begins the story. Now, this book is often compared to Fourth Wing, which I have not read, so I won't be commenting on the comparison, but I know they both involve dragon riding, so you'll have to figure that out for yourself. But without having that other book in mind, this one I thought on its own worked very well. It's an exciting story. I like dragon books that actually have dragons in them. This dragon is fierce and not just some cuddly companion. And again, it's a good heist story. I think that you see a lot of heist stories out there, but it's always great to have one with a different angle, and certainly you don't see dragons involved too often, at least in the heist stories that I read. So I had a good time with this one. It was easygoing, it was great to fly through, enjoyable characters, likable, perhaps a little bit predictable plot, but I'd argue that you kind of know the tropes of a heist story, and that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes you want to read and experience a story where you kind of know where it's going to go, but you just want to see how they get there and overcome the different challenges. So I had a good time with this one. Definitely would read more by this author as I continue to see more things come out and be published by them. I think that if you just enjoy good characters, fun plots, it has some depth to it, but there's also a bit of a lighter tone, which is a nice palette cleanser between some of the dark and messed up things that I tend to enjoy. Next is The Deathless Shores by P.H. Lowe, and this is a book that follows a young woman who was previously a lost boy in the world of Peter Pan. She has since been kicked out and is now trying to live her life in our modern world. I will admit that I have not at this time read Peter Pan. I really need to correct that, but this, as you can understand, is a retelling of the original classic work, and so I do think that it's important to look up reviews of those that can compare it to Peter Pan. I just vaguely know the story from the movies and so forth, but in terms of a book, just reading it on its own, I always think that a book should technically work even if you don't know the work that it is retelling or remastering. And in my case, I think that this one really does. My biggest surprise with a book like this is just how incredibly modern the present world that the character finds himself in. There's references to computers and other technology. And even though I knew it was a portal fantasy and I knew that they were plopped into our world, I find that authors normally shy away from those details in order to make the book feel more fantastical and mythical. And instead, this one felt incredibly grounded, which I do think was perhaps a bit of a misstep of the author. It kind of lost a bit of the atmosphere I was looking for. However, the writing itself was really lovely, and there is a dark undertone, as there is with the original tale, I understand, with Peter Pan. So it takes that darker spin and really explores the messed up side of the tale, the underbelly to it. And I found it to be quite intriguing and just very character focused. It wasn't a complete win for me. I wish the story had had a bit more of a heavier focus on the plot and narrative drive as you moved through it. So if you're someone who enjoys a quieter, slower burning character story and don't mind the darker themes explored in here, which are lightly touched upon but certainly hinted at, I would recommend this book to those that are looking for that type of story. Next we have The Phoenix Keeper by S.A. MacLean. This is a story that follows obviously a phoenix keeper, so the keeper of the phoenixes at this magical zoo. She is trying to preserve and keep the population alive. However, they have a breeding issue, and so she seeks out help from the keeper of the griffins. You find out that these two individuals do not get along, or rather they find each other a bit insufferable and have the initial clash. And then I should be really transparent that this is a fantasy romance story. So even though they don't initially like each other, it's kind of that, I won't say enemies to lovers, but more dislikers to likers type story where they grow on each other, and of course their differences end up working to their favor and so forth. This book, I will be transparent, you probably know this if you watch my channel already, is a lot cuter than the normal fantasy books that I'm drawn to. However, even I enjoy a palette cleanser. Sometimes I do want something a little bit more fun, and this one completely fit the bill. It's not the kind of book, again, that will be a 5-star read for me, but I actually was really impressed by it. I thought that despite having this really cutesy, light premise, it actually had a lot of depth. I thought the character work was surprisingly complex, and you have these two individuals, these two women working together, and again, a lot of the back and forth between them felt really well done and actually not glossed over, as I think the new subgenre of fantasy romance has really gotten a bad rap for a lot of poor writing. So I think that this one is great if you're looking for that kind of genre. I think this is going to fit the bill. If you're looking for an escapist read, something fun, again, a little bit of light between the grimdark stories that are bringing you down, this is one I actually had a really good time with. A bit off the beaten path for me, but an great escape, and I had a lot of fun reading it along the way. Next up, we have Mistress of Lies by K.M. Enright, and this is a story that follows a woman who is the daughter of a disgraced blood worker, and so you follow her in the story as she is trying to gather up her magic and grow stronger. She is gathering these spies and really trying to seek revenge on those that have harmed her family. She also gets tied in with this individual, this young man, and together they are tasked with trying to solve these murders that are happening and figure out what is going on. This is a piece of dark fantasy that was really intriguing. It leans into a lot of the things I really love. There is vampiric lore, there is again blood magic, and just all of the dark elements of fantasy that I'm drawn to that are surprisingly for me really hard to find without them turning into fantasy romance, and instead just having this dark supernatural tale that actually has a dark tone. The writing in this one I thought was lovely. It's really rich and deep, and once again I thought the character work was great because again you have these characters with really complex motivations and backstories, and I felt like the author really took their time with that, but at the same time I thought the pacing and narrative drive in this one was great. It's not a fast read, but it definitely moves forward at an agreeable pace, so I never felt like I was truly just standing still, but instead everything felt purposeful and well crafted. Really impressed. I think this is a debut novel, don't quote me if I'm wrong, but I believe so, and if it is, that's really impressive. I will definitely be reading more by this author because this one was a wonderful surprise. And finally we have Black Sun Rising and its 2 sequels in the Coldfire trilogy, all by C.S. Friedman. This is a sci fantasy series that I've recently completed. I will be fully honest here that I really feel like this series deserves more love on the internet, and specifically more time spent dissecting what I love so much about it. So I would like to do an individual series review, but honestly I'm just not prepared to do that right now. So I actually plan to reread the whole series and hopefully come back with some more detailed thoughts. So watch for that video coming up on my channel, but essentially this is a story that follows a group of individuals on this faraway planet. There's fae magic going on, there is other forms of supernatural creatures. I don't want to give away too much. I'm not sure what's on the back of the book, and I really felt like this book was a delight because again it has the science fiction background of being on another planet, but really first and foremost in terms of narrative it felt much more like fantasy and certainly has those those fantastical elements to it. And it leans ever so slightly into horror, just that dark, dismal side of fantasy that leans into that side of grimdark. And for me, I thought the characters were rich. They are following along in this journey, and a lot of the book, or series rather, is really spent traveling around, which doesn't always work for me. But the world was so fascinating, I wanted to know more. It reminded me ever so slightly of the Book of the New Sun quartet. Not the same by any means, but certainly reminiscent of that. And so if you're looking for something else with great prose, great characters, and the most fascinating world building all behind it, where you just want to, again, spend time with the characters, spend time in the world, and understand everything, which is exactly why I want to go back to the beginning, because a series where it doesn't give away all the details and you sort of figure it out along the way, which really makes me want to go back to the beginning now that I know how it ends, so I can better walk you through what to expect with the series in, of course, a spoiler-free way. All that being said, really enjoyed this one. If you love grimdark stories or anything I just described, highly recommend. I think a lot of you will enjoy this one as well. So that's it for this video here. You know the drill. Let me know of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? I'd also love for you to recommend me other books you think that I should check out in future videos here. But if you want to stick around, subscribe. I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, and other dark things. You can help me out with this video with a big thumbs up, a comment, even just an emoji. Lets me know you're here. Get creative in the comments. And you can hit that little notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.